The shift towards cannabis legalization. Germany's rational approach. For the past century, cannabis has been demonized to an extreme degree, but in recent years, more and more countries have begun to decriminalize it. Germany has recently legalized it, and there are strong reasons behind this decision. When compared to legal substances like alcohol, which is responsible for 1 in 20 deaths annually, cannabis is relatively mild. However, in order to justify strict legal action against it, its negative effects have been greatly exaggerated. At the same time, there has been significant pushback against these harsh policies, leading to a shift in public perception. If one were to follow the discussion in recent years, it might seem as though cannabis has virtually no downsides, with only positive effects being highlighted. This narrative, which many, including ourselves, have contributed to, was further reinforced by the fact that strict regulations made it difficult for scientists to conduct thorough research on cannabis, particularly regarding its long-term effects. Bureaucratic and legal obstacles meant that many studies relied on small sample sizes, limiting the scope of available data. Fortunately, this situation has begun to change in recent years, providing new insights that challenge the overly optimistic view that has emerged. While cannabis remains significantly less harmful than alcohol, it does have certain risks that have not been widely discussed. It is more addictive than previously believed, and can have substantial negative consequences with prolonged use. Before passing judgment, it is important to clarify that prohibition has not been an effective solution, and cannabis should be legal. However, legalization also means acknowledging that it is a drug with both benefits and drawbacks. To have an informed discussion, it is essential to take an honest look at the latest research. One of the biggest concerns is that cannabis is becoming increasingly potent. The primary psychoactive component in cannabis is tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, which interacts with cannabinoid receptors in the brain, influencing various cognitive functions. THC activates certain brain regions while calming others, creating a mix of sensations that define the cannabis experience. The more THC present, the stronger the effect. Over the past few decades, the concentration of THC in both legal and illegal cannabis products has more than doubled across the United States, Canada, and Europe. Increasingly potent strains are being developed, and products such as edibles and concentrates containing over 60% THC are becoming more common. Meanwhile, the availability of cannabis with lower THC content, under 15%, has declined. Unfortunately, research indicates that the risks associated with cannabis use increase with higher THC concentrations. Simultaneously, cannabis consumption has risen. In the United States, daily cannabis use surpassed daily alcohol consumption for the first time in 2022. In Canada, the percentage of individuals aged 16 and older who use cannabis increased from 22% in 2018 to 26% in recent years. However, it remains unclear whether legalization directly caused this increase, as studies have produced inconsistent results. In some cases, usage rates increased. In others, they remained stable. Additionally, the trend toward higher cannabis consumption began as early as the 1990s and accelerated in the 2000s, long before legalization became widespread. With more people consuming more cannabis than at any other time in the past century, and with the highest THC levels ever recorded, there are new concerns about its effects. One topic that was once dismissed but is now taken more seriously is cannabis addiction. A common argument is that cannabis is not addictive, or if it is, that addiction is not particularly concerning. For most users, this is true. Studies indicate that around 80% of cannabis users experience no significant issues. However, roughly 20% develop cannabis use disorder, which is characterized by symptoms such as difficulty controlling consumption, continued use despite negative consequences, increased tolerance, and withdrawal symptoms. Three primary factors influence the risk of addiction: THC potency, frequency of use, and the age at which use begins. The higher the THC content, the more frequent the use, and the younger the individual starts, the greater the likelihood of developing dependence. Research suggests that approximately 10% of cannabis users develop a serious addiction, often consuming daily to the point that it negatively affects their lives. As their bodies build tolerance, they require increasingly high doses or stronger strains to achieve the same effect. Frequent cannabis use can also lead to psychological effects, including mood disturbances, irritability, restlessness, paranoia, anxiety, and even depression. In a paradoxical twist, individuals who rely on cannabis to manage these symptoms may find that long-term use actually exacerbates them. Studies also suggest a connection between loneliness and frequent cannabis use. People who feel lonely are more likely to consume cannabis, while regular users may experience increased social withdrawal, reinforcing isolation. Additionally, heavy cannabis use can lead to a state of emotional numbness, where boredom becomes tolerable rather than a motivation to seek out new experiences. This can make quitting particularly challenging, as everyday activities may seem uninteresting in comparison. Another important aspect is physical withdrawal. The severity of withdrawal symptoms depends on the duration and frequency of cannabis use. Symptoms can include headaches, sweating, chills, loss of appetite, nausea, and abdominal pain. Sleep disturbances are common, with vivid and sometimes disturbing dreams. Withdrawal can also trigger feelings of depression, restlessness, anger, and anxiety. While these symptoms typically subside within a few days and disappear entirely after a few weeks, they can make quitting difficult for those who have developed dependence. Perhaps the most concerning issue is the potential impact of cannabis on brain function. This is a topic of intense scientific debate, with researchers divided on whether cannabis use leads to long-term, irreversible changes in brain structure. While there is no definitive consensus, THC does directly interfere with critical brain chemistry, and there is evidence suggesting that it may alter the brain's structure. Whether these changes are reversible remains uncertain. For heavy users, cognitive effects can include impaired memory, reduced learning ability, decreased attention span, and weakened decision-making and impulse control. Many of these effects diminish or disappear after quitting, but further research is needed to determine the full extent of long-term consequences. The risks are significantly greater for adolescents. The earlier cannabis use begins, the more years an individual has to accumulate potential negative effects. Teen users are more likely to develop dependence, struggle academically, and experience lower life satisfaction. Studies also suggest a strong link between adolescent cannabis use and an increased risk of developing mental health disorders such as psychosis, schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety later in life. The younger the user and the higher the THC dose, the greater the risk. Ultimately, while moderate cannabis use is generally safe for most adults, excessive consumption, particularly among teenagers, carries serious risks. Criminalization did little to mitigate these dangers, but legalization provides an opportunity to approach cannabis use more responsibly. Acknowledging the full spectrum of scientific evidence is crucial. For those interested in trying cannabis, the best approach is to wait until adulthood, ideally in one's 20s, when the brain is more fully developed. Experimentation can always come later, but early exposure increases the risk of long-term consequences. Now, shifting focus, today's sponsor,